He almost didn't stop. Ethan Miller was doing 58 miles an hour on Route 9 when his headlights swept across her, a woman's, standing alone in the dark, arms wrapped tight around herself, like she was the only thing holding herself together. He drove past, 10 yards, 20. Then something in his chest yanked him back like a rope tied to his ribs. He hit the brakes. What he didn't know what she didn't know was that one broken radiator hose on a cold Tuesday night was about to change both their lives forever. And the hardest part, it had nothing to do with the car. Drop a comment below. What city are you watching from tonight? I love seeing how far this story travels. And if this one moves you, hit subscribe, because this journey is just getting started. He almost didn't stop. That was the thing Ethan Miller would turn over in his mind for months afterward. The fact that his foot had pressed the gas, that he had already told himself, not my problem, that he had driven 20 yards past her before something deep and wordless pulled him back. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about her. All he knew was what his headlights had caught for half a second: a woman standing on the shoulder of Route 9 at 11 o'clock at night, alone, arms locked around her own chest, staring at a car that had clearly given up on her. He pulled over. He sat in the truck for a moment, engine still running, hands on the wheel. He wasn't nervous exactly. He was careful. He'd learned to be careful about things that looked like that they needed fixing. Sometimes you reached in to help, and the whole thing collapsed on you. But he got out anyway. The night air hit him cold and clean, the kind of October cold that hadn't decided yet if it was serious. His boots crunched gravel as he walked toward her, hands visible at his sides the way his father had once taught him. Don't spook people, Ethan, especially women alone in the dark. You show them you're safe before you say a word. She heard him coming. Of course she did. She turned fast, one hand shooting into her jacket pocket, shoulders squaring up like she was bracing for something. And even from 10 feet away he could see it, that look. Not fear exactly. Something harder than fear. The look of someone who had learned that strangers don't stop for nothing. I'm fine, she said, flat, final. Like the conversation was already over. Ethan stopped walking. He kept his hands where she could see them. Okay, he said. She blinked, like she'd expected more of an argument. You broke down, he asked. I said I'm fine. You did. He nodded slowly. Your hood's open though. She glanced back at the car. A silver Honda, older model, hood propped up, a thin ribbon of steam still curling out from somewhere underneath. She looked back at him, said nothing. I'm Ethan, he said. I do construction. I'm not a mechanic, but I've been keeping old trucks running since I was 16, so I know enough to be useful. That's it. That's all I am. A long silence. The wind moved between them. A semi rolled past on the highway, headlights washing over her face for a split second. And in that half second, he saw something he hadn't expected. Not toughness, not anger, exhaustion. The deep, structural kind that lives behind the eyes and doesn't go away with sleep. I called a tow, she said finally. When? An hour ago. Ethan looked down the empty road in both directions. Nothing. Not a light, not a set of headlights, nothing for as far as he could see. On a Tuesday night, he said. Out here, an hour's probably 2 more hours. She said nothing. Can I just look? He asked. I won't touch anything without asking. Another silence. Then the smallest, most reluctant tilt of her chin. He walked to the front of the car and leaned in. Didn't take long. The radiator hose had split clean near the clamp. He could see it in the beam of his phone light. A soft rubber hose that had just quietly given up. The overflow reservoir was bone dry. The engine had cooked itself, trying to keep going on nothing. He stood up. Blown radiator hose, he said. Even if the tow gets here and takes it to a shop tonight, which they won't. Most shops are closed. It won't be ready until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. Probably 2 days. She stared at him. Where are you headed? He asked. Something shifted in her face. Just a flicker. Just a half second of something she couldn't quite lock down in time. He caught it anyway. She started. Stopped. Started again. I'm heading to my sister's. In Clarksville. Clarksville's 90 minutes from here. I know where Clarksville is. Is she coming to get you? The pause this time was different. Longer. Waited. She doesn't know I'm coming, the woman said. And the way she said it, the careful flatness of it, the way she was working hard to make it sound like that, was a perfectly normal, perfectly fine thing. Told Ethan everything he needed to know. She had nowhere to go. Not really. He didn't say that. He just looked at her for a moment and then looked at the car and then looked back at her. My name's Nora, she said, quietly, like it cost her something. Nora. He nodded. I live about 8 minutes from here. I've got a spare room. You can stay tonight. I'll drive you to get the car sorted in the morning. No strings, no weirdness, just a safe place to sleep. The look she gave him could have stripped paint. You don't know me, she said. No. I could be anyone. You could be, he agreed. But you're a woman standing alone on a highway at 11 at night, and you've got nowhere to sleep, and I've got a spare room. So, she crossed her arms. I don't need saving, she said, and she said it like she'd had to say it before, more than once, to more than one person. I'm not trying to save you, Ethan said. I'm trying to give you a place to sleep. There's a difference. She didn't answer right away. She turned and looked at her car. Then she looked at the road. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. The way people look when they're doing a fast, silent calculation of risk, reading a face like a map, trying to figure out if this is the kind of help that costs more than it gives. He stood still and let her look. One night, she said. One night, he agreed. I'm not. I want to be clear that I'm not. Nora, his voice was steady, not unkind. You don't have to explain anything. Let's just get you out of the cold. She grabbed a bag from the back seat. One bag, canvas, worn at the straps. The kind that gets used until it falls apart, because there's no reason to replace it yet. He noticed but didn't comment. She locked the car, which struck him as almost heartbreaking. Locking a car that was broken down, on a dark highway. Guarding something out of pure habit, because letting go of control, even over the small things, wasn't something she did easily. They walked to his truck. He opened the passenger door. She got in without a word, pulled the bag onto her lap, and looked straight ahead through the windshield. He got in, started the engine, pulled onto the road. For the first 2 minutes, neither of them said anything. Then, without looking at him, she said, "Thank you." Just that, barely above a whisper. "Don't mention it," he said. His house was a single story, a single three-bedroom on Carpenter Road that he'd bought when he was married, and had spent the last 3 years slowly, quietly making his own again. Nothing fancy. Clean. A little sparse in the way that men's houses get when they stop having someone to buy decorative things. He unlocked the door and turned on the kitchen light. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. He watched her do it. Watched her eyes move over the space with that careful, appraising look that wasn't judgment, exactly, but wasn't fully trust either. "Bathroom's the second door, on the left," he said. "The room next to it has a bed, clean sheets. There's an extra blanket in the closet if it gets cold. Okay. You hungry? I've got..." He opened the fridge, peered in. Leftover chili, sandwich stuff, eggs. "I'm fine." He looked at her. She looked at him. "When did you eat last?" he asked. The pause was a fraction too long. "I'm fine," she said again, but this time there was an edge in it. And the edge wasn't anger, it was something more like pride. The thin, stubborn pride of someone who has gotten used to needing less than they actually need. "Okay," he said. He pulled the chili out of the fridge, put it in a pot on the stove. "I'm heating some up for myself. Eat if you want. Don't if you don't. It'll be there." He kept his back to her while it heated, gave her the room to decide without feeling watched. He heard her put her bag down, heard her sit at the kitchen table. When he turned around, She was sitting with her hands flat on the table, staring at them. And she looked for just that one unguarded moment like someone who had been holding on so hard, for so long, that they had forgotten what it felt like to set something down. He set a bowl in front of her and sat down across the table with his own. She ate. She didn't say thank you again. She didn't say anything. But she ate. And he'd been around enough people running on fumes to know that sometimes accepting a bowl of chili in silence is the bravest thing a person can do. He didn't ask her anything that night. Not what had happened. Not where she was really going. Not why her sister didn't know she was coming. He'd learned slowly, through his own life, through his own wreckage, that people tell you what they need to tell you when they're ready. And not a single second before. And that, asking too soon, is just another way of making someone feel like they owe you something. She went to bed around midnight. He heard the click of the guest room door. He washed the bowls, turned off the kitchen light, and sat for a while in the dark living room with his thoughts. He wasn't sure what he'd done. He wasn't sure if it was right or complicated or somewhere in between. He just knew that the image of her standing on that highway, arms locked around herself, face set like stone, the steam curling out from under the hood of a car that had finally quit on her. He knew that image was going to stick with him regardless. Driving past would have stayed with him just as much as stopping. So he'd stopped. He went to bed. In the morning, she was already awake. He found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She'd made herself. She'd found the filters, found the grounds, helped herself quietly and without asking, which told him she'd spent time in enough strange kitchens to know how to navigate one. Without making a production of it, she had a small notebook open in front of her, and she was writing in it, fast and focused. And she looked up when he came in with the particular expression of someone who has already been thinking hard for a long time before the rest of the world woke up. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She closed the notebook. Not quickly. Not like she was hiding something. Just closing it. Finished with that thought. Sleep okay. Fine, a beat. Better than I expected. He started coffee for himself, even though she'd already made a pot, because it gave him something to do with his hands. "I called the tow company," she said. "They got the car last night. It's at a shop in Deerfield. Riley's Auto." "Riley's is good," he said. "Tom Riley's solid. They said the hose replacement is easy, but they don't have the part in stock. Could be 2 days." Ethan poured his coffee and leaned against the counter. "So," he said, and left the rest of the sentence open on purpose. She looked at him. He looked back. "I'll find a motel," she said. "The nearest motel that's not completely depressing is 40 minutes from here and runs about $90 a night." She said nothing, but her jaw tightened, and he understood. $90 a night for 2 nights was $180. She was doing a very private, very painful calculation about right now. Or, he said, "You stay here 2 more nights. The car gets fixed, and you're back on the road by Thursday." "Ethan, I've got the space," he said. "My son's with his mother this week, so the house is quiet. You're not putting anyone out. And before you say it, you're not a burden. You're just a person who needs 2 days. You don't even know me," she said again. And this time it wasn't a deflection. This time it sounded almost like a genuine question, like she was asking him why he was doing this. Really asking, and wasn't entirely sure she'd believe the answer. He thought about that for a second. "No," he said honestly, "I don't. But I know you made your own coffee this morning, instead of waiting for someone to make it for you. And you already called the shop before I even woke up. That's enough for me." A long silence. Something in her face moved. 2 days, she said finally. 2 days, he agreed. She picked up her coffee cup and looked out the window, and he could see it happening, the slow, complicated process of a person who has built every wall she owns, deciding, against every instinct she has, to leave one door cracked open. Just barely. Just enough. What Ethan didn't know that morning What neither of them knew was that 2 days was not going to be 2 days. Because some things, once they start, don't stop on the schedule you planned for them. And some strangers, it turns out, were never really strangers at all. They just hadn't found each other yet. 2 days. That was the deal. That was the agreement. Clean and simple. The kind of arrangement that has a clear endpoint, so nobody has to feel uncomfortable about the middle part. 2 days, the car gets fixed. She gets back on the road. And Ethan Miller goes back to his quiet, predictable life on Carpenter Road. Except on the morning of day 2, Tom Riley called. Ethan was at the kitchen making eggs when his phone buzzed on the counter. He answered it without thinking, the way you do when you're not bracing for anything. Ethan, it's Tom. Listen, I got some news about that Honda I picked up for the woman staying with you. Nora, Ethan said. Right, Nora. So the hose is the easy part. I got that covered. But when my guy pulled it this morning, we found the water pumps shot too, and the thermostat housing is cracked. Now I can do all of it, but I gotta order 2 parts. And the earliest I'm looking at is Friday. Maybe Saturday morning. Ethan was quiet for a second. How much are we talking, Tom? Parts and labor. Somewhere between $680 and $720, depending on what else I find once we're in there. Okay, thanks, Tom. He hung up and stood there with the phone in his hand, and the eggs starting to stick to the pan. And he thought about how to say this in a way that wasn't going to make Nora feel like the walls were closing in, because he had a feeling already, after less than 36 hours, that Nora Bennett was the kind of person who felt the walls closing in on a very regular basis, and had learned to start moving before they finished the job. He heard her in the hallway, her footsteps, light and deliberate, the kind of footsteps that don't want to take up too much space. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp from the shower, notebook already in her hand, pen tucked behind her ear. That the shop? She asked. She'd heard. Of course she had. Yeah. How bad? He turned off the stove, looked at her directly, because he'd decided somewhere between the phone call and right now that he wasn't going to soften it. She didn't want soft. She wanted straight. Water pumps gone too, and the thermostat housing. Parts have to be ordered. Tom's looking at Friday, Saturday at the latest. She didn't react, not outwardly. She just stood there in the doorway with her notebook and her damp hair and her face that had clearly learned a long time ago how to absorb bad news without showing the impact. But her hand, the one holding the notebook, tightened, just slightly, just enough. And the cost, she asked. $680 to $720. A long pause. Okay, she said, quietly. Nora. I said okay. Ethan, not harsh, but firm. The voice of someone reorganizing fast, internally, running through numbers and options and backup plans she probably had stacked up in layers because she'd had to learn to carry backup plans the way other people carry keys. She walked past him to the coffee pot, poured herself a cup, and sat down at the table, opened the notebook. Started writing something. He watched her for a second, and then plated the eggs and set one plate in front of her without asking, because they'd gotten that far. At least, she'd stopped refusing food. She ate without looking up from the notebook. What are you writing? He asked, sitting down across from her. A list, she said. Of what? She hesitated. Then she turned the notebook slightly so he could see the top of the page. At the top, in her handwriting, it said, "Things I can control right now." He read it upside down without commenting. Underneath that heading, she'd written, "Find work here or nearby. Calculate minimum days needed. Notify sister. Do not panic." He looked up at her. She looked back at him. And there was something defensive in it. The look of a person waiting to be told that their coping mechanism is strange or excessive or sad. That's a good list, he said. Something in her expression relaxed. Barely, but it did. I make lists, she said. When things get I make lists. It helps me think. Nothing wrong with that. My ex used to say it was obsessive. Ethan picked up his fork. Your ex sounds like someone who didn't understand the difference between obsessive and prepared. She looked at him for a moment. Then she almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to her face, but it tried. She looked back down at her notebook. I'm going to look for work today, she said. Temp agencies, maybe, or something local. Anything to start moving again. I've got a half-day job this morning, Ethan said. I can drop you in town on my way. Pick you up after. You don't have to. I drive through town to get to the site, he said. It's not out of my way. She studied him. That calculation happening again behind her eyes. Okay, she said finally. It was getting easier for her to say that word. He noticed, though he didn't mention it. They ate the rest of breakfast in a silence that was, for the first time, almost comfortable. Almost. The Tuesday morning, he dropped her off in front of the Millbrook Public Library. She'd asked for the library specifically, said she could use their computers to apply for jobs and look up agencies. She got out of the truck with her canvas bag over one shoulder and then turned back. Hand on the door. Ethan, she said. Yeah. She seemed to be choosing her words with unusual care. When I get my situation sorted, when I have money and the car is running, you know that I'm going to pay you back for everything. Every meal, the room, all of it. He looked at her steadily. You don't owe me anything, he said. That's not how I work, she said, and there was no flexibility in it. It was the sentence of someone who had made their terms with the universe and did not intend to renegotiate. Okay, he said. We can talk about that when we get there. She held his gaze for one more second. Then she closed the truck door and walked toward the library without looking back. He drove to the job site thinking about that sentence. That's not how I work. He understood it in his bones. He'd been raised the same way. By a father who paid every debt, whether it was documented or not, who believed that owing something to someone was a specific kind of weight that honest people don't carry lightly. He just hadn't expected to recognize something so particular stranger he'd known for less than 2 days. By Thursday, the 2-day arrangement had quietly become a week. Neither of them named it. Neither of them talked about it directly. It just happened. The way certain things happen when two people are both trying hard to be practical and ignoring something that isn't practical at all. She had applied for 11 jobs by Thursday evening. She showed him the list. Not because he'd asked, but because she'd gotten into the habit of processing things out loud at the kitchen table, and he had gotten into the habit of being there to listen. I've got 2 callbacks, she said. One from a medical billing company, one from a property management office, both entry-level, both in Clarksville. Clarksville, 90 minutes away. He registered that detail and put it somewhere he didn't examine too closely. Those are real options, he said. They're possibilities, she corrected. Not options yet. She paused. There's also a temp agency that has a placement here, in Millbrook, data entry, 40 hours a week. It's not what I want long-term, but it's income, he said. It's income, she agreed. She wrote something in the notebook. What about your sister? He asked. You said you were going to contact her. The pen stopped moving. A long moment. We had a falling out, Nora said, and her voice did something subtle, flattened, the way voices do when they're working to keep feeling out of a sentence. About 2 years ago. I was in a bad situation, and I made some choices she didn't agree with, and I said things, and she said things, and then we just stopped. And the night I found you, you were going to her anyway. I didn't have anywhere else to go, she said quietly. There it was. The sentence she'd said on the highway that first night, the one that had come out of her like something she couldn't hold back any longer. He'd heard it then, and it had sat with him ever since. Have you thought about calling her? He asked. Not to ask for anything, just to try. Nora set the pen down on the table. Every day, she said. And she was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. I'm afraid she won't pick up, she said finally. And I'm afraid she will. I don't know which one is worse. He didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't anything to say. That was better than just letting it be true. After a while, she picked the pen back up and went back to her list. He got up and washed the dinner dishes and didn't say another word about it that night. Friday evening. Tom Riley called to say the car was ready. Parts came in early. Labor went smooth. Total came out to $660, which was the low end of what he'd quoted. Ethan relayed this to Nora. She sat very still. "I need to ask you something," she said. And her voice had a different quality to it, careful, measured, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a sentence and is still not entirely sure they're going to get through it. "Go ahead," he said. "I don't have $660 right now." She said it clean and direct. No cushioning, no apology folded around it. Just the fact. "I have $240 in my account. I have a security deposit that is supposed to come back to me from my last apartment, but that could be weeks. The temp agency placement in Millbrook starts Monday. The first paycheck would be in 2 weeks." She stopped. She looked at him. "I'm not asking you to pay for my car," she said immediately. "That is not what I'm asking. I'm asking if the car can stay at Riley's for 2 weeks while I get my first paycheck and pay for it myself, and if I can stay here until—" "Yes," he said. She blinked. "Ethan." "Yes," he said again, steady. No hesitation. "The car stays at Tom's. He won't charge storage for a couple of weeks if I ask him not to. You stay here until you get paid." End of discussion. She stared at him. "That is not the end of the discussion," she said. "No. I know," he said. "But it's where I'm starting from." Something flashed in her eyes. He wasn't sure what it was exactly. Not gratitude, or not only gratitude. Something sharper than that. Something that looked almost like anger. The way people sometimes get angry when they realize someone is being genuinely kind to them, because genuine kindness after a long dry spell can feel like an accusation. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. And this time, it wasn't rhetorical. This time, she wanted an actual answer. He thought about it. "Because you showed up on a highway with one bag and nowhere to sleep," he said. "And you still called the shop before I woke up. And you still made the coffee. And you still sat down and made a list instead of falling apart. And it seems to me like someone who does all that in the middle of everything, going sideways, probably deserves 2 more weeks without having to figure out where she's sleeping." The silence that followed was long and very full. Nora looked down at the table. "I don't know how to just accept things," she said, more to the table than to him. "I never have. It feels like setting myself up for something." "For what?" "For the part where it costs more than it looked like," she said. "Everything does. Eventually, help always has a price. She stopped, started again. "I've learned to check the receipt before I take anything." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "I'm not handing you a receipt." She looked up. "I'm not keeping a tab," he said. "I'm not expecting anything. I'm not going to hold this over you, or make you feel like you owe me something you can't pay back. I know that's a hard thing to believe, coming from a stranger, but that's the truth. And I don't know what else I can say to prove it, except to keep showing up the same way every morning." Her jaw worked, just slightly, the way people's jaws work when they are trying very hard not to feel something that is threatening to overwhelm the systems they have built to prevent exactly that. "Okay," she said. And her voice was different this time. Not the flat, controlled okay she deployed like a shield. This one was quieter, more fragile, the okay of someone who has decided, against their better judgment, to trust something just a little, just enough to take the next step. She started the temp job the following Monday, data entry for a property management firm that had its office on the second floor of a red brick building on Millbrook's Main Street. She wore the best version of what she had in her canvas bag dark slacks, a gray blouse that she'd pressed the night before, using a travel iron she'd had in the bag. And Ethan dropped her focus A4i5 without making it feel like a big deal, even though it was. When he picked her up at 5:15, she got in the truck And for the first time since he'd met her, she looked like a person who had released something. "How was it?" he asked. "Boring," she said. "Repetitive. Completely manageable." "That's a good day," he said. "Yeah," she said, looking out the window. "Yeah, it really is." She started cooking dinner that week, not because he'd asked, not because she felt obligated. She announced it on Tuesday morning before he left for work, standing in the kitchen with her coffee, saying, "I'm going to cook dinner tonight. Don't pick anything up on the way home." And the way she said it left no room for debate, which he appreciated. Because it meant she'd stopped asking permission to contribute and started just contributing. And that was a different kind of person than the one he'd found on the highway. She was a good cook, not fancy practical, generous, the kind of cooking that has fed real hunger rather than impressed dinner guests. She made a pot roast on Wednesday that filled the whole house with a smell so good that Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway for a full 30 seconds, just breathing it in before he said a word. "This is not temp job money cooking," he said. "My grandmother taught me," she said, without looking up from the stove. She believed that a good meal was the most honest thing one person could give another. He thought about that. She was right, he said. Nora looked over her shoulder at him, and this time the almost smile made it all the way. It was the first time he'd seen her actually smile. Not politely, not carefully actually, smile. Full enough that the corner of her eye creased. He stored that away somewhere, and didn't think too hard about why. But Thursday changed everything. He hadn't seen it coming. Maybe he should have. Maybe there had been signs, the way she'd gone quiet on Wednesday evening after dinner, the way she'd taken her notebook and gone to her room earlier than usual, woofed, the way she'd answered his good night with something that was barely a sound. He found out at 6 in the morning. He was up early, couldn't sleep, was standing at the kitchen counter with his coffee when he heard it. Crying. Not loud, not dramatic, the specific, terrible sound of someone crying very quietly, who does not want to be heard controlled, swallowed, the kind of crying that happens when you've gotten very practiced at not letting it out all the way. It was coming from behind her bedroom door. He stood there. Every instinct he had said, "Go knock. Say something, do something." And simultaneously every instinct he had said, "Give her the room. Don't make it a thing she has to explain. Don't make her feel witnessed in a way she hasn't chosen." He stood there for about 45 seconds. Then he went and made a second cup of coffee. He took both cups and set them on the kitchen table. He sat down. He waited. 8 minutes later, her door opened. She came out with her face composed and her hair done and her notebook in her hand. And she stopped when she saw him at the table with 2 cups of coffee and immediately understood. And for just a flash, just a half second, her composure cracked all the way open. Then she sat down across from him and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. "You don't have to talk about it," he said. "I know," she said. A long pause. "I called my sister last night," she said. He didn't say anything. He waited. She picked up. Nora's voice was careful and even and cost her something to maintain. "We talked for almost 2 hours. She stopped. It was a hard conversation. We said things that needed to be said for 2 years. And at the end, she told me she was glad I called. A beat. And I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't." "That sounds like a really hard conversation," he said. "I didn't sleep after." "No, I imagine not." She looked down at her coffee. "I'm fine. I wasn't expecting to feel so much afterward. I thought I'd feel better, and instead I just felt everything at once." "That's what happens when you've been holding things for a long time," he said. "When you finally set them down, your arms hurt worse than they did when you were carrying them." She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she did when something he said reached somewhere she hadn't expected. "That's exactly what it feels like," she said quietly. "Yeah," he said. "I know." She seemed to notice something in the way he said it, the particular weight of it. She looked at him for a moment, and then looked down at her coffee and didn't ask, because she could hear that it wasn't his morning to explain. And that restraint, that understanding that some things don't belong to you just because someone almost said them, told him more about Nora Bennett than anything she'd said directly. That afternoon, he called his friend Danny Kowalski. Danny had been his best friend for 22 years. The kind of friend who had been there for the marriage and the divorce and every bad decision and good decision in between. The kind of friend who could whittle something was off in 30 seconds, flat, and who had absolutely no patience for being danced around. "How's the guest?" Danny asked, before Ethan had gotten 3 sentences into the conversation. "She's good. She started work Monday. So she's staying. She's staying until her car's paid off, and she's got enough too." "Ethan." "What?" "How's the guest?" Danny said again, and his voice had that particular weight to it. That meant he was not asking about logistics. A long silence. "I don't know what you're asking," Ethan said. "You absolutely know what I'm asking. She's a person in a difficult situation who needed help." Ethan said, "I'm helping." "That's it." "Uh-huh," Danny said. "And how many meals have you cooked together?" "She's been cooking, actually." Danny stopped. "She's cooking for you." "She cooks. I clean up. It's a practical arrangement." "Sure," Danny said. "How many mornings have you had coffee together?" Ethan said nothing. "Ethan, it's not what you're making it," Ethan said. "I'm not making it anything," Danny said. "I'm just noticing that you sound like yourself for the first time in about 3 years, and asking questions about the person who seems to be the reason for that." The sentence landed harder than Ethan was prepared for. He sat with it. "It's not like that," he said. But even as he said it, he was aware that it sounded less certain than it had 60 seconds ago. "She leaving soon?" Danny asked. 2 weeks, maybe a little more. "And how do you feel about that?" Another long silence. "I feel fine about it," Ethan said. Danny let the silence run out on his end too. Then he said, "You're a terrible liar, you know that. Goodbye, Danny. Call me when you figure it out." He hung up. He sat in his truck in the driveway of the job site for a solid 5 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. Then he got out and went back to work, because there was nothing else to do with the particular feeling that had just settled in his chest like a stone he hadn't known was there until someone pointed at it. That evening at dinner she'd made pasta. Simple and perfect. They talked about small things for a while. Her day, his job, a repair he was bidding on for a farmhouse up on the county road. And somewhere between the pasta and the dishes he became aware that the silence between sentences had changed quality, that it had gotten comfortable, genuinely comfortable. The silence only gets between people who have stopped needing to fill it. And that was the thing that scared him. If he was being honest, not her, not the situation, the comfort, the ease of it. The way the house felt different with her, in it not crowded, not complicated, but fuller, more like itself. Like she had always been supposed to be here. And the house had just been waiting to point that out. He didn't say anything about it. He washed the dishes and she dried them. And they talked about something inconsequential. And he laughed at something she said. And she laughed at something he said. And it was so ordinary and so easy that it felt, paradoxically, like the most significant thing that had happened in years. Later, he lay in the dark in his room and stared at the ceiling and thought about Danny's question. "And how do you feel about that?" He didn't have an answer yet, but he understood, for the first time, that the question was real, that it was going to need an answer. That 2 weeks was not going to be nearly enough time to figure out what that answer was. 2 weeks became 3. Nobody announced it. Nobody sat down and renegotiated. It just happened the way most honest things happen quietly, without ceremony. One day, folding into the next, until the number stopped mattering and something else started mattering more. Nora's first paycheck cleared on a Friday. She came home from work that evening and set an envelope on the kitchen table in front of Ethan without a word. He looked at it, looked at her. "What's this?" he asked. $200, she said, toward the grocery bill, and whatever the room would cost at a motel. Nora. Pick it up, she said, please. He heard the please. It wasn't a polite please. It was a structural one, the please of someone who needs this one thing to stay standing, who has built the whole next part of their survival on the ability to give something back, rather than only take. He picked up the envelope. Thank you, he said. She exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since Monday. I called Tom Riley today, she said, sitting down. I'm going to pay off the car in 2 installments. First one next week. Second one the week after. That works, he said. And I've been looking at apartments. She opened her notebook. She always had the notebook, and turned it to a page dense with handwritten notes. There are 3 units in Millbrook that are in my range. One on Sycamore, one above the hardware store on Main, and one on the east side of town near the temp agency office. He looked at the list. Then he looked at her. You've been busy, he said. I'm always busy, she said. I just used to be busy surviving. Now I'm busy planning. She paused on that word like it was new to her, like she was trying it on and wasn't entirely sure it fit yet. Planning feels different. Different how? She thought about it. Surviving means you're always looking behind you. Planning means you're looking forward. Another pause. I forgot what forward looked like. He didn't say anything to that, but it stayed with him all evening, that sentence. The quiet weight of it. The way she'd said it. Like she was reporting the weather, rather than describing something that should have broken her. Saturday morning, she had an appointment to look at the apartment on Sycamore Street. She asked if he could drive her, since her car was still at Tom's. He said, of course, and drove her there, and waited in the truck while she went in with the property manager, a heavy-set woman named Carol, who wore a lot of turquoise jewelry and talked too loud. Nora was inside for 22 minutes. He knew, because he checked the clock when she went in and again when she came out. She got back in the truck and put her seatbelt on and stared through the windshield. Well, he said. It's fine, she said. Fine good or fine tolerable. She was quiet for a second. It smells like old carpet, and the kitchen faces a brick wall. But it's clean. It's in my budget. And the landlord seems straightforward. She paused. It's fine. He started the truck. You don't sound excited, he said. I'm practical, not excited, she said. Excited is for people who haven't been surprised by how much things can go wrong. He pulled out of the parking spot. You're allowed to want something that feels like more than fine. Nora. She looked at him sharply, like he'd said something that landed somewhere unexpected. I know that, she said. But she said it like someone who was only beginning to believe it. They drove back in silence, not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that happens when both people are thinking about the same thing from different angles, and neither one has figured out how to be the first to say it out loud. Sunday changed the temperature of everything. Ethan's son, Jake, came home. Jake was 9 years old, with Ethan's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn mouth, and he came through the front door that Sunday afternoon the way he always did, at full speed, backpack hanging off one shoulder, already talking before he was fully inside. Dad. Mom let me stay up until 10:30 last night, and we watched a movie, and I had 2 bowls of popcorn, and he stopped dead in the hallway. Nora was in the kitchen. She'd heard the door and come to the doorway, and now she and Jake were looking at each other with the mutual, assessing suspicion of 2 people who had not been warned about each other. Ethan stepped in. Jake, this is Nora. She's been staying here for a little while. Her car broke down and she's getting things sorted. Jake looked at Nora, then at his dad, then at Nora again. Do you sleep in the guest room? He asked. I do, she said. That's my room when I'm here, he said. Not aggressive, just stating a fact, establishing the record. I know, she said, your dad told me. I've got my things packed up. I can move to the couch while you're here. Jake considered this with the grave seriousness of a 9-year-old weighing logistics. Then he said, The couch is actually pretty comfortable. I've slept on it before, when I was sick and Dad let me watch TV late. Good to know, Nora said. Another long, assessing look from Jake. Then he turned to Ethan. What's for dinner? And just like that, the assessment was over. That evening. Jake did his homework at the kitchen table while Nora sat across from him working on her own things job applications, apartment research, her lists. Ethan was in the next room, finishing up some bid paperwork, and he could hear them through the open doorway. At first, nothing. Just the scratch of pencil on paper and the occasional page turn. Then Jake said, "What are you writing?" "Lists," Nora said. "Of what?" "Things I need to do. Things I've already done." A pause. "Why do you make lists?" "Because when I write things down," she said, "they feel real. And when I cross them off, I know I actually did something." Jake seemed to consider this. "I do that with my chores," he said. "Dad makes me write them down and check them off." "Your dad's pretty smart about that." "He's pretty smart about most stuff," Jake said, with the absolute matter-of-fact certainty that only a 9-year-old talking about his father can produce. "He fixed our neighbor, Mr. Garrity's porch steps for free. Because Mr. Garrity has a bad knee, he didn't tell anyone. I just saw him do it." A silence. "He didn't tell anyone," Nora said. "Nope, he just did it." Ethan, in the next room, had gone very still. He was not going to get up. He was absolutely not going to walk in there. "That sounds like him," Nora said quietly, and the way she said it not surprised, just confirmed. Like she was placing a piece she'd already suspected did something complicated to the air in the house. Ethan stared at his paperwork and did not move. Monday morning. Jake went back to his mother's for the school week. He hugged Ethan in the driveway and then, unexpectedly, turned to Nora, who had come to the door to say goodbye, and said, "You can keep the guest room. The couch was fine." Then he got in his mother's car and was gone. Nora stood in the doorway watching the car pull away. "He's a good kid," she said. "He is," Ethan said. "He really is." She looked at Ethan for a moment. "You're a good father." He didn't know what to do with that, so he just said, "I try," and went inside. But the warmth of it stayed with him all day. The second week of the third week, something shifted in Nora that Ethan couldn't quite name but could absolutely feel. She was still structured, still disciplined, still making her lists and tracking her progress, and maintaining the careful, self-sufficient routine she'd built like a scaffold around herself. But there was something different in the way she moved through the house, less provisional, less like someone who was visiting, and more like someone who was present, here, in the actual sense of the word. She rearranged the kitchen cabinet, where the coffee things lived, because the way they'd been organized made no functional sense, and she did it without asking. And then looked at him, across the counter, waiting to see if that had been a problem. "Better," he said. She nodded and went back to what she was doing. She bought a plant. A small succulent from the grocery store, $3, barely larger than her fist. She put it on the kitchen windowsill without any explanation, and it sat there being alive, in a very small and determined way. And Ethan did not say a word about it, because he understood. The way you sometimes understand things, without having them explained, that the plant was not really about the plant. It was about deciding to put down something that needed tending. It was about letting herself need something to tend. Wednesday evening of that third week, they had their first real argument. It started over nothing or over something so small it shouldn't have been anything, except that the small things are almost never actually about the small things. She had picked up a second temp assignment, an evening data entry job 2 nights a week, on top of her regular day position. She announced it at dinner, like it was simply a logistical update. The way she announced everything. "That's 6 days a week," Ethan said. "It's money," she said. "You're already working 40 hours. 46 with the evening shifts. I've worked more than that before." "For what?" he said. "You're already on track. You've paid Tom. You've got another payment ready. You're looking at apartments. What are you running from?" The table went silent. She looked at him, and her eyes had gone sharp in the particular way they went, when something had touched a nerve she didn't want touched. "I'm not running from anything," she said. "I'm building a cushion, a safety net, because I have been in a position where I had nothing, and I am never going back to that position. And if that means working 6 days a week for 2 months, then that's what I'm going to do." "Nobody's questioning that," he said. "Then what are you questioning?" He put his fork down. "I'm asking if you're okay," he said. "That's all." The sharpness in her eyes shifted, moved towards something more complicated. "I'm fine," she said. "Nora." "I am fine, Ethan." But her voice had a fracture in it this time, something running under the surface that the fine was barely covering. "You came home yesterday, and you went straight to your room," he said. "You didn't eat dinner. This morning you were up at 5:30. You were watching me," she said, and now there was real heat in it. "I live in the same house," he said, keeping his voice level. "I'm not watching you. I'm noticing. There's a difference." She pushed her chair back, stood up, stood there for a second, like she couldn't decide which direction to go. "I don't need to be managed," she said. "I'm not managing you." "Then what do you call this?" She gestured between them. "You noticing my sleep schedule, asking about my hours, checking if I'm eating." "I call it caring," he said, quietly, without drama. "I call it two people who have been living in the same house for 3 weeks, and one of them is clearly running on fumes, and the other one is not fine with watching that happen." The silence after that was very different from the silence before. She was still standing. He was still sitting. The food between them was getting cold. "I don't know how to let someone do that," she said. Finally, the heat gone from her voice, replaced by something rawer. "Just care, without a cost. I keep waiting for the other shoe. I keep waiting for the part where something is expected back that I don't have to give." "Nothing is expected back," he said. "I know you say that." "Then believe it," he said. "Not harsh, urgent, not because I'm asking you to trust me. Because you have been in this house for 3 weeks, and I have not once, have I once, made you feel like you owed me something you didn't want to give." A very long pause. "No," she said, "you haven't." "Okay," he said, "then sit down and eat your dinner and take Sunday off from both jobs. That's all I'm asking." Another pause, then slowly she sat back down. She picked up her fork. "I don't like being told what to do," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not telling you. I'm asking." She ate a bite, said nothing, then, "Sunday off." "Sunday off," he confirmed. "Fine," she said. But the corner of her mouth moved. Barely. Just enough. And that was how they had their first argument and their first truce in the same conversation, and came out the other side of it, knowing each other a little better than before, which is sometimes exactly what an argument is actually for. Thursday came with a phone call that Ethan had not seen coming. It was his ex-wife, Claire. They had a functional relationship, the kind that divorced people develop when there's a child between them, and they've both decided that the child matters more than the grievance. They were civil. Sometimes they were even warm. But Claire did not call in the middle of the week without a reason. "Jake told me about the woman," she said, when he's answered. Ethan sat down on the back step. "Her name is Nora," he said. "Her car broke down. She's been staying in the guest room. Jake said she's been there 3 weeks. Give or take." A pause. "Is she a problem?" "No," he said. "She's a person who needed help and is getting back on her feet." Another pause. Longer this time. He could hear Claire thinking. She was a direct person. Always had been. And she was building towards something. "Jake likes her," Claire said. "I know. He told me she makes lists too. He said she helped him organize his homework, their schedule. A beat. He came home Sunday with his backpack actually organized." "Ethan, that has literally never happened." Ethan laughed before he could stop himself. "She's good at systems," he said. Jake also said Claire stopped. "What?" he said. "Dad smiles more when Nora's in the room." A pause. He said it like it was just an observation. You know how he is. Ethan said nothing. I'm not calling to start anything, Claire said. I wanted to know if you were okay. You've been careful since we split. Ethan. Careful in a way I always felt bad about. And if something is happening there that is making you less careful, then I think that's probably a good thing. He sat on the step for a long moment. I don't know what's happening, he said, honestly. I know she's leaving when she has enough to go, and I know that's fine. That's how it's supposed to be. Uh-huh, Claire said, in exactly the same tone Danny had used. Don't start, he said. I'm not starting anything, she said. I'm just your ex-wife who knows you better than you know yourself sometimes. You can factor that in however you want. A pause. Take care of yourself, Ethan. She hung up. He sat on the step for a long time after that, staring at nothing in particular, and let himself feel the full weight of what two different people who knew him well had now said to him. From two different directions. That evening he came inside and found Nora at the kitchen table, notebook open, and she looked up when he walked in. And something on his face must have been different, because she frowned slightly. You okay? She asked. Yeah, he said. I'm good. She looked at him for a second longer than necessary, like she wasn't entirely sure she believed him, but had decided to let him have it. Dinner's in the oven, she said. 20 minutes. Thanks, he said. He sat down at the table across from her and she went back to her notebook. And he sat there in the warm, quiet kitchen with the smell of food in the air and the scratch of her pen on paper, and he thought, very clearly, with a clarity that felt almost alarming. I don't want this to end. Not when the car's paid off, not when she finds an apartment, not when her situation is stable and she no longer needs this house or the guest room or the arrangement that had never really been just an arrangement. He didn't say it. He wasn't ready to say it. He wasn't even sure what saying it would mean or what would happen afterward. But the thought was there now, solid and specific, and it was not going anywhere. The following Saturday, something happened that made the thought impossible to ignore. Nora had spent the morning doing laundry and running errands, small, domestic, ordinary things. And she came home in the early afternoon with a bag from the hardware store and another from the grocery store, and she set them on the counter and started putting things away. With the easy efficiency of someone who knew where everything lived, because by now she did know where everything lived, because this house had become, without anyone planning it or naming it, hers too, in some functional daily sense. And then she stopped. Ethan was watching from the doorway, and he saw it happen, saw her stop in the middle of putting a box of pasta on the shelf, hand in the air, and just stop, and stand there, very still. Nora, he said. She didn't answer right away when she turned around. Her expression had something in it he hadn't seen before, not fear, not the guarded blankness she deployed when something was threatening, something more vulnerable than that. I looked at the apartment on Sycamore again today, she said, drove by it, stood outside. And it's fine, she said. It's genuinely a fine apartment. She paused. I couldn't make myself go in. He didn't say anything. I've been telling myself I'm staying. Because it's practical, she said. Because the math works out better here. Because I'm paying down the car and building savings and it makes financial sense to. She stopped. But that's not another stop. I looked at that building today. And I thought about this kitchen. I thought about the plant on the windowsill. I thought about Jake telling me I could keep the guest room. Her voice had gone very quiet. And I don't know what to do with that, she said. Because I have not let myself want something like this in a very long time, and I don't know if it's real or if I'm just. She pressed her lips together. I don't know if I'm confusing being safe with belonging somewhere. I don't know if I'm feeling something real or just reacting to the first genuinely kind situation I've been in. And she looked at him. In longer than I want to admit. The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan walked in from the doorway. He stopped on the other side of the counter from her. He looked at her. really looked at her. The way you look at someone when you've decided that what you're about to say is true and you're going to say it without dressing it up or hedging it. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She nodded. "Barely." "I called Danny 2 weeks ago," he said. "He asked me how you were, and I told him it wasn't like that. That you were just someone who needed help, and I believed it when I said it." He paused. "I don't believe it anymore." Her breath caught, audibly, just slightly. "I don't know what it is," he said. "I'm not standing here saying I have it figured out, but I know that I noticed 2 days ago that the coffee cabinet has been reorganized, and it's better. And I know that I noticed there's a plant on the windowsill that I would never have bought myself. And I like it being there. And I know he started again. I know that Jake came home last Sunday and looked at you like you were just supposed to be here, like that was just obvious." Nora's eyes were very bright. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I haven't been good at this in a long time. Probably not ever." "Neither have I," he said. "I don't want to make a mistake," she said. "I can't afford another mistake. Not emotionally. She shook her head. "I've already used up a lot of what I had." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. He paused. Let himself say the honest thing. "I just want you to know that whatever you decide about the apartment, about any of it, it's not because of me. It should be what you actually want. Not what's practical, not what makes sense on a list." He held her gaze. "What do you actually want, Nora?" The silence that followed was the longest of the entire 3 weeks. She looked at him, her jaw worked. Her hands, flat on the counter between them, were very still. And then quietly, carefully, like someone stepping onto ice they're not sure will hold, she said, "I don't know yet, but I know I'm not ready to stop finding out." He nodded. "That's enough," he said. "That's more than enough." She exhaled, long and slow. And then she picked up the pasta box and put it on the shelf. And he got 2 glasses from the cabinet, and they made dinner together in a kitchen that felt, for the first time, like it fully belonged to both of them. Neither of them said another word about it that night. They didn't need to. Some things, once said, don't need to be repeated to be true. They just need to be allowed, given room to breathe. Set down carefully and tended, the way you tend a small plant you've placed in a window. Not sure yet how big it will grow, but certain enough to water it anyway. Certain enough to stay. The Monday after the kitchen conversation, Nora went back to work like nothing had happened. That was her way feel something enormous, say the true thing, and then fold it up and put it somewhere interior while life continued moving. Ethan had come to understand this about her. She didn't process things by talking them to death. She processed them by keeping her hands busy and letting her mind work underneath. He respected that. He did the same thing, more or less. What changed was small but unmistakable. She stopped announcing her movements like she owed him an itinerary. She stopped prefacing things with phrases like, "I know this isn't a permanent situation," or "once I'm out of your hair." She stopped apologizing for occupying space. She just occupied it, quietly, efficiently, in her particular way, but without the constant low-level apology that had hummed under everything she did in the first 2 weeks. He noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. Tuesday evening she got a phone call that she took in her room. He heard her voice through the door, not the words, just the tone. And something in the tone was different from her normal register, softer, more careful. When she came out 40 minutes later, her eyes were slightly red at the edges, but her face was composed and her chin was up. "My sister," she said, before he could ask. "She wants to come visit. Next month. She wants to see that I'm okay. In person." "Is that good?" he asked carefully. Nora sat down at the table. She thought about it for a real moment, not a reflexive one. "Yes," she said, "I think it is. I think I'm scared of it. But yes." She paused. She said she's proud of me. For calling. For getting myself together. Another pause. And her voice did something complicated on the next sentence. She said she's been fiend for me to call for 2 years. She said she never stopped waiting. Ethan sat down across from her. "She sounds like a good sister," he said. "She is," Nora said. "I forgot that for a while. I think I needed to be in a place where I could remember it." She looked up at him, and there was something direct and clear in her eyes. "I think being here helped me remember it." He held her gaze. "Good," he said simply. She nodded, looked down at the table, then back up. "I'm not good at saying thank you," she said. "You know that." "I know. But I want you to know that I understand what this has been," she said. "What you did. Not just the room and the food and the car. The not making me feel like I owed you something I couldn't afford. That part," she held his gaze. "That part is rarer than people think." He didn't look away. "You deserved it," he said. "You always did." She pressed her lips together, nodded once. Then she opened her notebook and clicked her pen and went back to her evening. And he went back to his, and the air between them was warm, in a way it hadn't quite been before. Wednesday morning arrived with a complication. Ethan had a bid meeting with a commercial client, a small hotel renovation that would have been the biggest contract of his year. Steady work through winter. The kind of job that could let him hire 2 more guys and stop running everything lean and tight and constantly worried. He'd spent 2 weeks preparing the estimate. He was ready. He was halfway out the door when his phone rang. His foreman, Pete Dillard. "Ethan, I need you to come to the Garrity property first. We've got a situation. I've got the Mercer meeting at 9. Pete. I know, but the subfloor under the addition failed inspection. The inspector's here right now, and he's flagging the whole section. If you're not here in 20 minutes to talk to him directly, he's shutting us down for a week minimum." Ethan stood in his own doorway with his keys in his hand. A week shutdown meant penalties, meant the Mercer bid looking disorganized, meant money bleeding from a job that was already running thin. He called the Mercer contact and rescheduled. He hated doing it. He did it anyway. He was out the door in 4 minutes. Nora was in the kitchen, and she'd seen the whole thing, his face going through 3 different calculations in 30 seconds. The phone calls, the pivot. When he came back through to grab his work folder, she was standing at the counter, and she said, "Go. Don't worry about the meeting. Rescheduling is not failing." He stopped. "How did you?" "I heard enough," she said. "Go fix the real problem. The meeting will happen." He looked at her for 1 second. Then he said, "There's coffee left in the pot," and went out the door. On the drive to the Garrity property, he found himself thinking that she'd said exactly what he needed to hear, in exactly the right number of words. No excess, no cushioning, just the truth. Cleanly delivered. Claire had been effusive when he was stressed, always trying to help by adding more words, more reassurance, more. It had never quite worked. He'd always needed less, not more. Nora gave him less, and it was exactly enough. He filed that thought away and dealt with the subfloor inspector. The problem was fixable, expensive and annoying, but fixable. He spent 3 hours on site, worked it out with the inspector, lined up the remediation crew, and rescheduled the Mercer meeting for Friday. By noon, he was back in his truck, tired but intact. He texted Nora. Problem handled. Meeting rescheduled. "You were right." She texted back 4 seconds later. "I know." He laughed out loud, alone in his truck at a stoplight. It was the first time in a long time he'd laughed at a text message. Thursday brought Danny Kowalski, who showed up unannounced at 6 in the evening with a 6-pack, and the specific look on his face that meant he had decided this visit was happening. Whether it was convenient or not, Ethan let him in. Nora was in the kitchen making chili. She looked up when Danny came in, assessed him in about 2 seconds with the particular efficiency she assessed everyone, and said, "You must be Danny." Danny stopped walking. He looked at her, then at Ethan, then at her again. "Yeah," he said. "How'd you know?" "Ethan's mentioned you," she said. "And you have the look of someone who's been wanting to come over for a while, and finally, stop waiting for an invitation." Danny turned to Ethan with an expression that said, very clearly, without any words at all, I see exactly what is happening here. Ethan gave him a look back that said, "Don't." Danny sat down at the kitchen table. "That smells incredible," he said, meaning the chili. "You're welcome to stay for dinner," Nora said, in the tone of someone who is being polite, because politeness is a value, not because they're eager for the company. "I'd love to," Danny said, with the ease of a man who has never been uncomfortable in his life. Dinner was the three of them. Danny was Danny Warm, loud. Funny in the way of someone who has decided that life is more fun when people are laughing. The kind of man who makes a table feel crowded in the best way. He told construction stories. He made Ethan tell the story about the time a raccoon got into a house they were renovating and destroyed 2 days of drywall work. He was charming without being slick, and Ethan watched Nora carefully during all of it. She didn't fully relax. She wasn't that kind of person around strangers, but she engaged. She asked real questions. She laughed at the raccoon story, actually laughed. Not politely, and Danny caught that laugh like it was something worth catching and grinned. After dinner, Nora excused herself to do some reading, and Ethan and Danny sat at the table with the last of the six-pack, and Danny waited approximately 12 seconds before he said anything. "Okay," Danny said. "Don't," Ethan said. "I'm just going to say one thing." "You're going to say multiple things." "One thing," Danny said. "And then I'll leave it alone." He waited until Ethan looked at him. "She looks at you the way people look at something they're afraid to want. You know what I mean. Like they keep checking to make sure it's still there, but they're trying not to be obvious about it." Ethan said nothing. "I watched her do it 3 times during dinner," Danny said. "And every time she caught herself doing it, she looked back down at her food." He paused. "I'm not saying what it means. I'm just saying I saw it. Because you should know." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What would you do?" he said finally. "If you were me?" Danny thought about it honestly, which was one of the things Ethan had always valued about him. He didn't just say whatever sounded good. "I'd tell her the truth," Danny said. "Clean and simple. Not a big production, just the truth. And then let her do what she does with it." He paused. "Because she seems like the kind of woman who's made enough decisions for other people. She needs to make this one for herself." Ethan looked at his bottle. He said, "I know." "The Mercer bid," Danny said, shifting gears the way old friends can. "You get that sorted. Meetings Friday." "Good. You need that job." "I know I need it." "Then go get it." Danny stood up, picked up the empty bottles, put them by the sink without being asked. "And Ethan, don't wait too long on the other thing. The right moment isn't going to show up wearing a sign." He let himself out. Ethan sat alone at the table for a while. Then he got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to check on the plant on the windowsill, which had, over the past 3 weeks, visibly grown. He'd never had a plant in this house before. He'd never thought about having one. Now he checked it every couple of days, without fully realizing he'd started doing it. He went to bed. Friday morning, the Mercer meeting went well, better than well. The client liked the bid, liked Ethan's track record, and said they'd have a decision by the following Wednesday. It wasn't signed yet, but it was close. Ethan drove back through Millbrook feeling, for the first time in months, like the business was pointing in the right direction, rather than just holding steady. He stopped at the hardware store, bought a replacement hose for a small job he had that afternoon, was walking back to the truck when he ran into Carol, the property manager, with the turquoise jewelry, coming out of the coffee shop next door. "Oh, Ethan," she said, "I meant to call you. Your friend, the woman who came to look at the Sycamore unit. Nora." He stopped. "She called me yesterday and said she wasn't going to take it," Carol said, "which is fine. I've got 2 other people interested. But she sounded like she'd thought hard about it, so I hope she found something better." "Yeah," Ethan said, carefully neutral. "I think she's still sorting through her options." "Well, tell her if she changes her mind, she knows where to find me." Carol jangled her bracelets and went on her way. Ethan stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Nora had turned down the apartment. She hadn't told him. He drove home. He didn't know what the not telling meant. There were a lot of possible reasons. She might be looking at other places. She might have decided to stay longer for financial reasons. She might have decided things he didn't know about yet, going in directions he hadn't tracked. But she hadn't told him. And the not telling felt significant, in the same way that the plant on the windowsill had been significant. In the same way that rearranging the coffee cabinet had been significant small things that meant something larger underneath. He got home before she did, made coffee, sat down, waited. She came in at 5:40, still in her work clothes, dropped her bag by the door, the way she always did now, and came into the kitchen and stopped when she saw his face. "What?" she said. "I ran into Carol today," he said, "from the Sycamore property." A pause. Something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, exactly. Something more honest than guilt. "She said you turned it down," he said. "I did," Nora said. "When were you going to tell me?" She sat down, clasped her hands on the table, looked at him directly, because she always did, even when it cost her. "I was trying to figure out what I was going to say," she said. "Turning down an apartment you can afford when you're staying in someone else's house requires a reason, and the reason is complicated." "Tell me anyway," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I have enough money now," she said. "I have the car paid off. I have 2 months of savings. I have a permanent position offer from the temp agency that starts in 3 weeks. I have all the practical pieces." She stopped. "I could move tomorrow. That's the honest truth. I could move tomorrow, and it would be fine. It would be manageable. I would be okay." She held his gaze. "But I outstood at that apartment on Sycamore Street," she said. "And I thought about what okay felt like before I came here, and okay used to be enough. Okay used to be the goal." And now she stopped. Pressed her lips together. "Now okay feels like giving something up. And I don't entirely trust that feeling, because I don't have a great history of knowing the difference between what I want and what I'm afraid of." "What are you afraid of?" he asked. "Staying for the wrong reasons," she said. "Mistaking warmth for something deeper, gratitude for something it isn't. I've done that before. I have made decisions in my life based on the relief of feeling safe, and they were the wrong decisions, and I paid for them. This isn't that," he said. "How do you know?" she said. And it wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. The most genuine thing she'd asked him yet. He thought about it carefully before he answered, because she deserved a careful answer, not a quick one, not a reassuring one, a true one. "Because you're not making this decision from a desperate place," he said. "You're not on Route 9 at 11 o'clock at night with nowhere to go. You have money. You have a job. You have your sister back. You have options, real ones. You could walk out of here tomorrow and be okay. You said so yourself." He paused. "So if you're still here, it's not because you're trapped. And if you're thinking about staying, it's not because you don't have somewhere else to go." She stared at him. "It's because you don't want somewhere else," he said. The silence that followed was enormous. It took up the whole kitchen. It took up the whole house. Nora looked down at her hands, then at the plant on the windowsill, then back at him. "I wrote something in my notebook last week," she said. "I've been writing it, and crossing it out, and writing it again." She reached into her bag, pulled out the notebook, set it on the table between them, opened to a page near the middle. He looked at it. The line she'd written, circled, crossed out, and rewritten in slightly larger letters was this: "Figure out what's happening with Ethan before assuming it has an expiration date." He read it twice. He looked up at her. "I kept crossing it out," she said, "because writing it down made it real. And real things can go wrong. Real things can also go right," he said. "I know." Her voice was very quiet. "I know that. I'm still learning to believe it." He reached across the table. Not to take her hand, he didn't reach that far. He just put his hand on the table, open between them. "Then let me tell you something that's real," he said. And I need you to actually hear it, not filter it, not look for the cost, not decide what it means before I finish saying it. Just hear it. She looked at his hand on the table, then at his face. She nodded. I don't want this to end when your life gets easier, he said. I don't want you to go, because the math finally works out and you can. I want you here regardless of the math, regardless of whether it makes sense or whether it's the practical thing. He paused. I want you here because this house is better with you in it, because I'm better with you in it. And I don't say that to put pressure on anything. I say it because you asked me to tell you what's real, and that's the most real thing I've got. Nora was very still. Her eyes were doing that thing they did when she was working very hard to keep herself intact, when the feeling was larger than her system was built to handle. And she was managing it in real time. Ethan, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, and she cleared her throat. I spent a long time in situations where someone telling me they wanted me, around, turned out to mean they wanted something specific from me, and I am trying very hard right now not to hear this through that filter. I know, he said. I'm not saying I don't believe you, she said. I'm saying it's taking me a second to let it in, because letting it in means deciding to trust something again. And the last time I did that without a safety net. You ended up on Route 9, he said gently. Yeah, she exhaled. I ended up on Route 9. He left his hand on the table. He didn't push. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance. He just sat there, steady, the way he'd been steady every single day since the night he'd pulled over on that highway. And he let her have the time she needed. And then, slowly, she reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. They just sat there in the kitchen, with her hand on his. And the plant on the windowsill, and the smell of coffee that had gone cold in the pot. And it was the most uncomplicated moment either of them had had in longer than they could remember. After a while, she said, I'm not ready to label anything. Okay, he said. I need it to develop at whatever speed it develops at. Without pressure. Without a timeline. Okay, he said again. And if it turns out that what I'm feeling is just gratitude and warmth and relief and not something deeper, I need us to be able to say that without it being a catastrophe. It won't be, he said. I promise you that. She looked at him for a long moment. How are you so calm about this? She asked. He almost laughed. I'm not calm. I'm terrified. I'm just better at sitting still with it than I used to be. Something softened in her face. Yeah, I was married for 8 years, he said. I watched something I thought was permanent turn out not to be. I spent 3 years being careful about everything afterward. I'm very familiar with terrified. He paused. It doesn't mean you don't move. She was quiet. Then she said, Your divorce. You've never really talked about it. No. Do you want to? He thought about it. Not tonight, he said. But, yeah, at some point, yeah. She nodded. Her hand was still on his. Okay, she said. And this time the word was full, none of the flatness, none of the armor, just the word, plain and real and open at both ends. They made dinner late that night. It was almost 8 by the time they ate, which neither of them had planned. But neither of them had wanted to break the spell of what was happening at the table by doing something as ordinary as cooking. But eventually, they did cook, and they ate. And they talked about small things and some bigger things. And at one point, Nora said something that made him laugh so hard he had to put his fork down. And she looked pleased with herself in a way that crinkled the corners of her eyes. He washed, she dried, same as always. Except not the same at all. At the end of the night. At the hallway that split toward their separate rooms, she stopped. Ethan. Yeah. She looked at him. Something in her eyes had gone very clear and very direct. I'm not staying because I need to anymore, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever I decide about apartments or living arrangements, or any of it, I'm not making that decision from a desperate place. She paused. I'm staying tonight, and maybe tomorrow, and maybe after that because I want to." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. She nodded, turned toward her room, stopped one more time. "The Mercer meeting," she said, without turning around. "How'd it go?" He smiled. "Really well," he said. "Good," she said. "You've been working toward that for a long time." Then she went to her room, and he went to his, and the house settled around them the way houses do when the people inside have finally, quietly, without ceremony, stopped pretending that what's between them is anything other than what it is. He lay in the dark and thought about Route 9, about the headlights sweeping across her in the dark, about pressing the gas and then hitting the brakes. Because something wordless pulled him back, about the 20 yards he'd already driven past her before he stopped. He thought about what would have happened if he hadn't stopped, if he'd made the easier choice. If he'd told himself not my problem, and kept driving, and gotten home and gone to bed, and never known what he'd passed. He thought about that possibility for a long time. Then he let it go, because he had stopped. And that made all the difference. The Mercer contract came through on Wednesday. Ethan got the call at 7:15 in the morning, standing in the kitchen in his work boots with his coffee. And when he hung up, he stood there for a solid 10 seconds, just holding the phone. Then he turned around and Nora was in the doorway, reading his face the way she'd gotten good at. And she said, "You got it." It wasn't a question. "I got it," he said. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and hugged him. Fast, firm, both arms. The kind of hug that doesn't ask permission because it doesn't need to, and then she stepped back just as quickly, like she was checking whether she'd overstepped. And he grabbed her hand before she could fully retreat and said, "Thank you." For all of it. The morning of the inspection, the text, all of it. She looked at their hands, then at him. "You did the work," she said. "Yeah," he said. "But you made it easier to show up for it." She didn't look away. For once, she didn't deflect or qualify or fold the moment up into something smaller. She just stood there and let it be true. "Congratulations, Ethan," she said. And she meant every syllable of it. He squeezed her hand once and let go. And they both went back to their morning. And the ordinary shape of the day continued around something that was no longer quite ordinary at all. That evening, Danny came by again, this time because Ethan had called him, and the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table. And Ethan opened a bottle of bourbon he'd been keeping in the back of a cabinet since his last birthday, and they toasted the Mercer contract and Jake's upcoming school play, and Nora's permanent position offer from the temp agency, which she had officially accepted that afternoon. Danny raised his glass at Nora. "Official Millbrook resident," he said. She shook her head slightly. "I haven't signed anything yet." "You will," Danny said, with the complete and easy confidence of someone who has already decided how a story ends. Nora looked at Ethan across the table. He gave her the smallest shrug that said, "He's not wrong, but I'm not going to say it for him." She looked back at Danny. "Maybe," she said, but the corner of her mouth went with it. Danny saw it. He said nothing. He just drank his bourbon with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has made his point without making a scene, which, for Danny, was considerable restraint. After he left, Nora washed the glasses, and Ethan put the bourbon back in the cabinet, not all the way to the back this time, and they moved around the kitchen in that easy, unrehearsed way they'd developed over weeks, the particular choreography of 2 people who have learned each other's rhythms without meaning to, who know without asking who takes which side of the sink and who gets the dish towel, and who turns the lights off last. "Danny's not subtle," Nora said. "He really isn't," Ethan agreed. "He means well. He always means well." That's the maddening part. She dried the last glass, set it on the shelf, turned around and leaned against the counter. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always," he said. "When I leave, when I get my own place, what does this look like? Between us." She said it directly. The way she said most true things, without softening the edges. I want to know what you're thinking, not what you think I want to hear. What you're actually thinking. He turned to face her. Leaned back against the opposite counter, thought about it honestly, the way she'd asked. I'm thinking I don't want it to stop, he said. Whatever it is, I want it to keep going, whatever form that takes. I'm not asking you to stay in this house forever. He paused. I'm asking you not to disappear when you go. She looked at him for a long moment. I'm not going to disappear, she said. Good, he said. I've never been good at the in-between, she said. The part that isn't defined. It makes me anxious. I like knowing what something is. So do I, he said. But I also know that some things need a little time before they can be named. And I'd rather give this the time it needs than rush it into something that breaks under the pressure. She nodded slowly, like she was absorbing that, turning it over, checking it for flaws. Okay, she said, that I can work with. Good, he said again. She pushed off the counter, moved past him toward the hallway, stopped just at the threshold and said, without turning around, For what it's worth, I'm not going to disappear, Ethan. I've been disappeared before. I know what it does to a person. A pause. I won't do that to you. He believed her. Completely. She went to her room, and he stood in the kitchen for a minute, feeling something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness, exactly deeper than that. More structural. The particular sense of rightness that comes when a person realizes that the life they're living is actually the life they want to be living. He turned off the kitchen light, left the small light over the stove on, the way he always did now, because Nora had mentioned once that she sometimes got up in the middle of the night for water and didn't want to fumble for the switch in the dark. A small thing, his smallest thing. The most honest thing in the house. 3 weeks later, Nora signed a lease. It was a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a building on Delaney Street, not the one on Sycamore, not the one above the hardware store, a different one entirely. One that she'd found by accident when she walked past the building on her lunch break, and saw the sign in the window and went in on impulse, which was, Ethan noted privately, the most spontaneous thing he'd ever seen her do. She came home that evening holding the lease copy, and she set it on the table between them like a document that required witnessing. Delaney Street, he said, reading it. 6-minute walk from the agency office, she said. 4th floor has a family with a baby. The super is a retired postal worker who fixes things the same day they break. And the building has a laundry room that actually works. I checked. Of course you did. The rent is $40 under my budget, which means I can put the difference into savings. Obviously. She looked at him. You're not sad about this. It wasn't a question, but it was looking for something. I'm not sad, he said honestly. This is good. This is what's supposed to happen. You came to this house with one bag and no plan, and now you have an apartment and a job, and your sister coming to visit next month. He looked at her. This is what winning looks like. Nora, I'm not going to be sad about watching you win. Her jaw worked. She pressed her lips together, looked down at the lease. I want you to know something, she said. Tell me. Moving into this apartment doesn't feel like leaving, she said carefully. It feels like the next part, like the story isn't ending, just changing shape. She looked up. I need you to know that. I know it, he said. I need you to actually know it, not just say it. Nora. He waited until she held his gaze. I know it. She exhaled. She pulled the lease back across the table and tucked it into her notebook. She moved out on a Saturday. Ethan helped her. He borrowed a pickup from Pete Dillard because she'd accumulated more than one canvas bag worth of things over 2 months, a box of books, a small lamp she'd bought at a yard sale, the succulent from the kitchen windowsill, which she wrapped carefully in a dish towel for the move. He noticed when she took the plant. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the elevator was small, and they went up and down 3 times with boxes and it was ordinary and exhausting, and she directed him where to put everything with the crisp efficiency of a woman who had already mapped the room in her head and was simply executing the plan. At the end, when the boxes were all up and the truck was empty, they stood in her almost empty living room. Her living room. And she looked around at the boxes and the lamp on the floor and the plant sitting in the window where she'd put it first, before anything else, and she looked like a person who was trying to feel something large enough for the moment, and not quite finding the container for it. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I think yes." She turned to face him. "It's strange. I've moved so many times in my life. I'm good at moving, but this one feels..." She shook her head. "It feels different." "Because you're not running," he said. She blinked. "Yeah," she said softly. "Because I'm not running." He looked around the apartment. Bare walls, boxes everywhere. The whole shape of a life waiting to be arranged. "You're going to make this good," he said. "I know," she said, not arrogant, just certain. The particular certainty of someone who has done hard things and knows they can do more. He left her to it. Drove back to Carpenter Road. Walked into his house. Set his keys on the counter, stood in the kitchen. It was quiet. It had always been quiet before she came. He'd been used to the quiet. He'd told himself the quiet was fine. Standing in it now, he understood that fine and good were not the same thing, and that he had been settling for fine for 3 years, without fully realizing it. He looked at the spot on the windowsill where the plant had been. Then he put his keys in his pocket, got back in his truck, and drove to the hardware store. He bought a different plant, something he knew nothing about. Something the woman at the register had to help him pick. A small green thing in a terracotta pot. He set it on the windowsill when he got home, and it looked slightly wrong. Too small for the space, and he liked it anyway. That Sunday, he took Nora to a diner on Route 12 for breakfast, her request. Texted Saturday night at 9:30. "Breakfast tomorrow. I want to tell you something." He was there at 8, and she was already in the booth when he walked in. Notebook on the table, coffee in hand. "You're always early," he said, sliding in across from her. "So are you," she said. "We were both 10 minutes early. The waitress thought we were the same level of anxious." He laughed. "What did you want to tell me?" he asked. She picked up the notebook, opened it to a specific page, slid it across the table. He looked at it. It was a list, but not like the earlier lists, not the careful, desperate survival accounting of a woman managing a crisis. This one had a different quality. The handwriting was looser. The items were different. At the top it said, "The list that replaced the other list." Underneath, in neat lines, "Job permanent, secured, car paid off, running, savings 3 months, apartment signed, mine, sister dinner planned for next month, trust in progress, fear getting smaller." And at the bottom, circled twice, with a small asterisk. "Figure out what's happening with Ethan," no longer a question. He read that last line twice. He looked up. She was watching him with the careful, clear expression she used when she'd decided to be completely honest and was waiting to see if the honesty landed where she'd aimed it. "No longer a question," he said. "No longer a question," she confirmed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "What's the answer?" She didn't hesitate. "That I want to see where this goes," she said, with clear eyes, without running from it and without rushing it, just forward, together, at whatever pace makes sense. She held his gaze. "I've spent a long time either gripping things too hard or letting go too fast. I want to try the middle, with someone who I actually trust." He let that sit for a moment. "I can do the middle," he said. "I know you can," she said. "That's why I'm saying it to you, and not someone else." The waitress came. They ordered. They ate. They talked about her apartment, and his contract, and Jake's school play, which was in 3 weeks, and which Jake had informed Ethan, with great seriousness. Required attendance from both of them. Ethan had said he'd pass that along. Nora had said when he'd told her about it the week before, that she'd be there. She'd said it without hesitating. He had stored that away somewhere very specific. Autumn settled over Millbrook in the way it always did, hard and sudden. The way good things sometimes come, all at once and without much warning. The trees made their annual argument for beauty, and then let everything go, and the air had that clean, cold clarity that makes everything feel slightly more real, slightly more vivid, the way a sharp edge catches light. 1 year. It had been almost exactly 1 year since a Tuesday night on Route 9. Ethan thought about that sometimes, not constantly, not obsessively, just occasionally. The way you think about a door you almost didn't open, a turn you almost didn't take, a 20-yard drive past someone standing alone in the dark. He thought about the version of that night where he didn't stop, where he kept his foot on the gas and told himself not my problem, and went home to his quiet house and his quiet life and never knew what he'd driven past. That version of his life was so close he could feel the edge of it, one decision away, one moment of not stopping. He didn't spend much time in that version. Nora's sister, Rachel, came to visit in November. She was a year younger than Nora, with the same brown eyes, but a different energy, warmer on the surface, quicker to laugh. But you could see, if you were paying attention, that she'd been carrying something heavy for 2 years, and that setting it down was taking some adjustment. They had dinner together, all of them, Ethan, Nora, Rachel, and Jake, who had decided by this point that Nora was simply a fixed point in his life's landscape, and treated her accordingly, with the easy familiarity of a child who has decided someone is trustworthy, and moved on to more pressing matters, like whether the dinner rolls were the good kind. Rachel sat across from Ethan, and she watched him the way sisters watch the people their siblings have brought to the table. And somewhere between some main course and dessert, she leaned over and said quietly enough that it was just for him. She's different. Since all of this, she's more herself than I've seen her in years. He didn't know quite how to answer that. She did that herself, he said finally. I just privated the conditions. Rachel looked at him. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that says, I see exactly what you are, and I approve. Sure, she said. Just the conditions. After dinner. After Rachel had gone back to her hotel, and Jake was doing homework at the kitchen table, Nora found Ethan in the living room. She sat beside him on the couch, not across from him, not at the careful distance of two people still negotiating their proximity, but beside him, with the easy naturalness of someone who has decided where they belong and stopped asking permission to be there. She likes you, Nora said. She's checking on you, he said. That's what she's supposed to do. She is, Nora agreed. She also said she started again. She said she hasn't seen me look like myself in a long time. She said I look settled. Do you feel settled? She thought about it, honestly, the way she did everything. Yes, she said. And it still scares me a little, feeling settled. Because the last time I felt settled, it turned out to be an illusion, and everything collapsed. She paused. But I think this time the settled comes from inside, rather than from the outside. It's not because of a situation. It's because of me, because of decisions I made. She looked at him. Because of who I'm around. He put his arm around her. She leaned into it, easy, uncomplicated. Jake appeared in the doorway. He looked at them on the couch, looked for about 2 seconds with the solemn assessment of a 9-year-old taking inventory. Then he said, Dad, can I have a snack? Fruit or crackers? Ethan said. Crackers, Jake said, and disappeared. Nora laughed, a full laugh, quiet, genuine, the laugh of someone who is completely at home. He tightened his arm around her slightly. She didn't pull back. From the kitchen came the sound of cabinet doors and a 9-year-old successfully locating crackers. And the house was warm, and the evening was settling in. And it was all so ordinary, it was almost impossible to believe. It had started on a dark highway, with a blown radiator hose and a woman who said she had nowhere left to go. The Sunday closest to the 1-year mark, Ethan drove out to Route 9. He didn't tell anyone he was going. He just went, early morning, before the day got started. He drove the stretch of road and he found the spot, the pull-off, the gravel shoulder, the section of guardrail that looked like every other section, but wasn't. Because this one was the one where something had happened that changed the whole shape of his life. He pulled over, cut the engine, sat. He thought about himself 1 year ago, the man who had almost not stopped, who had been careful for 3 years, careful about everything, living in his house on Carpenter Road, with the quiet and the spare rooms and the life that was fine. That was manageable. That was getting through. He thought about what getting through had cost him. Not dramatically, he didn't deal in drama. Just the quiet cost of it. The dinners alone. The house that echoed. The mornings that didn't have anyone in them. He sat there for a while. Then he took out his phone and called Nora. She picked up on the second ring. Because she was always awake early. Always had been. "Where are you?" she asked, instead of hello. She'd learned to read his silences over the phone the way she read his face in person. "Route 9, he said, "the spot." A pause. "Oh," she said quietly. "Yeah. You okay?" "More than okay," he said. I wanted to be here for a minute. Think about it." She was quiet on the other end of the line. The good kind of quiet. The kind that holds space without filling it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He looked out through the windshield at the road. "I'm thinking the best decision I ever made was stopping that night," he said, "and I almost didn't. And that scares me in a way that it stays with me." How close it was. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The hardest thing I ever did was accepting your help." Her voice was low and clear. "I fought it so hard, Ethan, you know I did. Because I was so sure that help had a price. That kindness was a transaction. That no one stops on Route 9 at 11 o'clock at night because they just want to help. A pause, and then you did. And you just kept being exactly what you said you were. And I didn't know what to do with that for so long." "I know," he said. "I know you know," she said. "That's the thing. You always knew. You waited anyway." He looked at the road. Thought about that Tuesday night. The headlights sweeping across her. Yards. The decision, made in the gut, before the brain had caught up. "I didn't wait," he said. "I just kept showing up. That's all I did." "That's everything," she said. "Showing up is everything." He sat in the truck on Route 9, and the morning was clear and cold, and the road was empty, and he felt, deeply and without qualification, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because it had gone according to plan. There had never been a plan. Not because the story was perfect. It wasn't. There had been fear and confusion and arguments and 100 small moments of almost. But because the person on the other end of this phone call was real. Because the life on Carpenter Road was real. Because the plant on the kitchen windowsill was real. And Jake's school play was real. And Rachel coming to dinner was real. And the notebook full of completed lists was real. And the lease on Delaney Street was real. And all of it had come from one moment of not driving past. "Come home," Nora said, not a request, not a command. Just the simplest true thing, offered without ceremony. He started the truck. "On my way," he said. He pulled back onto Route 9 and drove toward Millbrook. And didn't look in the rearview mirror, because there was nothing behind him worth looking back at. Everything worth anything was ahead. The house, the work, the boy who organized his homework now, the woman with the notebook and the plant, and the laugh he'd only heard for the first time a few weeks in, and had been listening for ever since. Nora Bennett had whispered on a dark highway that she had nowhere left to go, and Ethan Miller had stopped. That was all it took. One moment of choosing the harder, truer thing, one foot on the brake instead of the gas. One man deciding that a stranger in the dark was worth more than the comfort of his routine. And from that single, unremarkable moment, on an unremarkable stretch of road, in an unremarkable town. At 11 o'clock on an ordinary Tuesday night, two people had found their way back to the lives they were supposed to be living. Not because the universe had arranged it, not because it was fate or luck or some grand design, but because he stopped, because she stayed, because, In the end, that was enough.